I'll jump straight into the questions. There's been lots of great stuff. Also, thank you to somebody called Chris in the chat who seemed to be a medical professional, a perfusionist, which is a job that I didn't realise had a name, but apparently it does. Rohin, would you like to explain what a perfusionist does?
Yeah, well, a perfusionist has a number of different roles, to be honest, but I guess the main thing is in cardiac theatres. They're the person responsible for the extremely complicated cardiopulmonary bypass machine. So we talked a little bit about ECMO. They also will look after that in a lot of places. And cardiopulmonary bypass is a lot like the ECMO machine. It's a whopping great device which replaces the heart and lung function while somebody is undergoing surgery on those organs. So I couldn't even pretend to follow half the stuff perfusionists talk about. So it's a very, very difficult, complicated process.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'll launch into the questions in roughly the kind of order that you did the talking. So I've got a few questions about elite athletes, and then we'll go on to a few questions about high altitude, and then we've got some other questions from the end as well. So I just had a question before we go into the audience questions, because I it's my stream and I can do this, which is my resting heart rate is weirdly about 45-ish. And I'm, I go running every other day. I'd probably say about 10 or 15 kilos overweight. I'm not, I'm not in terrible shape, but I'm not in amazing shape in any way. So how is that possible? Because I'm clearly not McGill in terrain or Mo Farah.
Well, I don't really want to sort of remotely diagnose anything, but there is obviously a variety in what we define as normal. I think if your heart rhythm is entirely normal, then you're probably fitter than you think. If your heart rate's in the 40s, mine has just crept out of the 40s, sadly, with lockdown. I used to be quite proud of my resting heart rate, and it's creeping up as I think a lot of us have struggled to get our requisite exercise with everything that's been going on. But if you're feeling fine, that's probably nothing to worry about.
To be fair, that was maybe a year or so ago when I used to wear a Fitbit, and I was a bit thinner than I am now, and lockdown hadn't taken its toll. Anyway, on to the audience questions. So Garth asked a question about: is there anything to think to the notion that elite athletes suffer from enlarged hearts in their life, and does the heart change sort of shape and size based on kind of different exercises? Say if you do a lot of strength versus a lot of endurance versus, does that affect anything, or is it all kind of the same?
Yeah, that's a great question. That very much so. So there's a whole subspecialty really within cardiology which is dealing with athletes, and in a nutshell, the changes that we see in highly trained athletes is, yes, the heart absolutely does get bigger, and normally when we see cardiac enlargement, that's a bad thing, because that means that our heart is struggling. So the kind of patients that come in to see me who are unwell often have very dilated hearts. This is a different kind of enlargement. This is obviously physiological, and so it means that with each beat the heart can eject more blood. The wall of the heart starts to thicken, just like any muscle. It will, if you work it out, it will start thickening, and that is a very interesting thing. And there's no clear way to differentiate between changes that are problematic and changes that are purely caused by training. And so sometimes, particularly in athletes who are maybe in their 40s and older, we'll see people who are clearly very, very fit, but they'll have hearts which are kind of borderline. We're not really sure if this is purely athletic heart or if there's something going on, like there is some abnormal thickening of the heart muscle. And a lot of the time, unfortunately, the safest thing to do is to ask athletes to detrain, to actually stop training, and then seeing what happens to their heart and seeing if it returns to normal. And in response to the question about different exercises, that's very true. The athletes who combine endurance with load tend to be the real extremes here, who are rowers and cyclists, because they are not only aerobic endurance athletes, but they're also sort of pushing against sort of using their big muscles, and so they will have a combination of that thickening and enlargement of the heart. But yeah, absolutely, you know, that there's a lot of research going on in that field. There are a lot of complications that can develop. I sort of touched on them briefly. We know that people who've got athletic hearts are more likely to get different abnormal rhythms, particularly a bit later on. So yeah, it's a fascinating field, actually. Yeah.
And so moving on to the Sherpas, but actually I think I might link this back as well. So you kind of said that they've evolved over time, like they're now genetically sort of distinct in their sort of amazing cardiac abilities. So, for example, how long would it take athletes, if you had, you know, a family of athletes, how long would it take for that to be passed on, if ever, or are we talking thousands of years? And then I guess the second thing is, Nikki also asked a question saying, do you think it's due to ancestral links with the Denisovians?
Somebody's been doing a bit of reading there. Yeah, we do think that the mutation, which is nicknamed the super athlete gene, may well have been inherited wholesale from the Denisovans. So the Denisovans were a primitive, well, that's the wrong word. They were a human species that we know a remarkable amount compared to how much we've actually found of them. You know, a lot of the information we've got from them is from some finger fragments in the Denisova caves in the kind of Russian Chinese border, I think. And they, like the Neanderthals, you know, they have passed on some of their DNA to modern humans. We will have interbred with them. And so people in that part of the world, you can trace some DNA back to Denisovans in the same way that a lot of Europeans can trace their some DNA back to Neanderthals. And we think that this gene probably came from them. And so I mentioned that the modern Chinese probably also got this gene as well, and it is seen there, but it doesn't appear to have been selected out. So there's no sort of population-wide benefit there. And I think, I know you're kind of asking a bit tongue-in-cheek about breeding a sort of family of athletes, but remember, this is something that is because they were living in this very extreme environment where there's a very real survival benefit from being able to cope better in that low oxygen setting. So before sort of modern civilization and you know, medical science, that really would have been a significant advantage. So that is something that I don't know if, you know, I as I said, I'm not an expert in evolution, but I think there's a difference between sort of trying to selectively breed a certain thing. I mean, that's called eugenics, so I don't really want to advocate that. But you know, this is quite an unusual case. I don't, you know, when I talk about this, sometimes you know, the comments I get, I feel like people are maybe getting the wrong end of the stick. It really is quite an unusual case.
So just going back to what when you were talking about the hearts and in terms of heart cells, someone said that, didn't you say in a video previously about why isn't there heart cancer, that we don't grow new heart cells? But then when you were talking about pregnancy, I think you mentioned something around that. Could you just explain that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the athletes. It's not the heart cells that increase in number. It's that the cells get bigger. And so all sort of remodeling of the heart is not caused by an increase in heart cells. And it's true, there's a very limited regeneration capacity for heart cells, which is why, you know, someone like me has got a job, because when there's damage to the heart, a lot of the time it's completely irreversible, and that damage doesn't get fixed. So you know, there's a stat that again I've sort of mentioned before, which is that we're born, we think, with about 50% of the heart cells that we die with, and there's only a limited amount added, mostly in the early years of life, and thereafter, you know, that's it. And it in a similar way, neurons as well have a similar kind of thing, which is why we don't see much brain cancer. The brain cancers that we do see are to do with support cells, but actually neuronal cancer, like heart cancer, is pretty rare because the cells are just not dividing very commonly, so you don't get chances for errors to occur, whereas tissue that divides very rapidly, breast, stomach, colon, that's where we see cancers, because there are lots of opportunities for mutations to develop and then become cancer.
That makes sense. So later on in the talk, you were talking about sort of hypothermia and extremes of sort of cold and heat and these kind of things. So Martin asks, are any of these extremes actually used in medical treatments? And Garth later said, I think hypothermia can also help with recovery from brain injury. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we do, there's still some ongoing research, and having worked at across a few different centers, there is sort of variation in what different places do at the moment. So that just reflects that we're still figuring it out about what to do after brain injury. And cardiac arrest that I mentioned essentially is inevitable. There will be some brain injury in anything the very shortest cardiac arrest. So it's the same kind of thing. And one option is to just cool the head. So you'll often see in intensive care little cooling hats that go on to patients. Some places will cool the entire body. Some places will use a catheter that sits inside and cools the heart itself. Obviously, that's when the heart is kind of the culprit to begin with. And there are other uses of hypothermia in medicine. It's hypothermia for cardiac surgery was much more in vogue a few years ago. Our watching perfusionists will know much better than me that it's kind of gone out of fashion in most places now, because cardiopulmonary bypass has become so much better. So if you wanted to operate on the heart in the past, you'd have to cool it so it effectively stops or beats very, very slowly so you can work on it. And so people were cooled to very, very low temperatures, akin to the cases we saw of people who drowned, and the surgeon would work on the heart very quickly and then rewarm it. But now we don't really need to do that, because you can just reroute blood via the bypass machine. So, but hypothermia was certainly used in cardiac surgery quite commonly, although less so now. So, and as I mentioned, transporting organs is another use of hypothermia.
Someone in the chat also mentioned did they remake it? I was going to say the 1990 film Flatliners, which I think was based on that.
100% medically accurate.
Yeah,
everything in that film is correct.
Oh, well, that's good then. So we'll move on to a few other questions. So one interesting question that came up was, when you were talking about heat and cold, is there actually any evidence for saunas actually having benefits? Can alternating between extreme cold and extreme hot do anything? Is that a good idea to go in a sauna, jump in a cold bath, get back in the sauna? Is that good?
There's a big question. There is a lot of frankly pseudoscience about saunas out there. I have seen some. I will first say that I haven't looked into this in great depth. I probably should. But yes, there is some evidence that saunas have some beneficial properties for sure. And the stuff that I recall reading is that they can help with lowering blood pressure. And yeah, I think that was the paper I read. It was looking at sort of blood pressure effects. I'm not aware of anything saying that there's anything particularly harmful with alternating between cold and hot. But I would take with a pinch of salt a lot of the kind of very articles that say that this is incredible and you should build a sauna in your house and everything. I'm not sure that that's really the case. A lot of these trials have no control group. They're just like measuring some people using a sauna and saying, oh, do you feel better? Yeah, I feel fantastic. Great. I mean, that doesn't really prove anything, but yeah, I am aware of some evidence that they are beneficial, and nothing that I've seen that they're too harmful, as long as you're done sensibly.
I mean, I love a sauna, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Right. I mean, I don't know why people always have to attempt to prove everything with science. But, we must show that this, just like, if it feels okay, and it's not harmful, why not?
Yeah, I think it's because I think some people like to test themselves, see how long they can stay in there, and go, "I must be doing me good if it's
I think that's when you start getting in hot water.
Hey, there we go. Well, it's steam, though, isn't it? Well,
yeah. Sorry. Okay. Ruin.
Anyway, here we go. So our perfusionist Chris asked a really interesting question. He asked, "Do you think in the near future we'll be able to individualize advanced treatments for patients whose hearts have stopped?"
Well, yes, I hope so. I mean, that's kind of the goal with a lot of our treatments. I guess what maybe Chris is getting at there is the difficulty we have at the moment knowing who's going to benefit, and that is one of the biggest problems in this kind of very advanced mechanical support for the circulation, because these are not risk-free procedures. They're very invasive. They can cause all kinds of complications, and we are not very good at selecting who should benefit. And when I looked at this with just small numbers of patients, but it really wasn't. We'd actually did a little study in Cambridge. It wasn't obvious from the demographics of these people going on to something like ECMO who would actually survive and who would do well. You'd think, okay, maybe the younger patients will do better, but actually, it's more important how long that the downtime, how long they haven't had a heartbeat for, or other factors about them. It's a really complicated picture. And I guess maybe what Chris is asking is how we can stop putting patients through this really quite invasive process when they're not going to benefit from it, and that's a really difficult question at the moment. So yeah, there's a lot of research going on in this field, particularly in Europe as well as the UK. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, because when someone says to me individualized medicine as a non-medical person, my mind immediately goes to things like genetically targeted drugs that are pharmacologically, and it goes to that sort of things. But of course, there's a whole sort of medical treatment side of things that is not drug based, that can also be, like I say, individualized to try and work out what can be of most benefit. So I missed a question earlier, which I'll go back to. It's a question from Lee. When we were talking about altitude and altitude sickness, Lee said, "How does Diamox assist in developing high altitude acclimation?" I believe Diamox is a kind of altitude sickness drug that you can take. Is that right?
Yeah, it's carbonic anhydrase, and what Diamox does is it essentially encourages you to just take a little extra breathing. So as I was saying, you get this stimulation for breathing based on your pH. So what it does is it just changes your pH ever so slightly to try to stimulate the body to essentially hyperventilate. And because it's something subconscious, you don't realize it, but you just end up taking some extra breaths. So that's really all it's doing. It can't generate any more oxygen or anything like that, but it's just stimulates a little bit of extra hyperventilation, which can mean that you get in a bit of extra oxygen.
Oh, interesting. There's actually an interesting question that's just come up in the chat, which I thought I'd put to you straight away, which is Leona said they've seen a few scientific articles on studies about injecting new heart cells or using stem cells or that kind of thing to improve recovery and repair damage from heart attacks. But how does it work? How do the injected cells interact with the heart cells? And are there any other alternatives that could be used, or do you know anything about that kind of treatment?
Yeah, I think I won't say too much about it, because I know some people who are kind of involved in the field, and it's kind of one of those technologies that always seems to be coming, tomorrow.
like nuclear power, or nuclear fusion.
It really is a fascinating field, but I remember talking to a professor about maybe working with him many years ago on something like this, and that didn't work out. But I'm not sure that it's really progressed. Again, this is not my field, but it's something that there are incremental gains happening, but I think it's more just a case that our understanding has yet to catch up with what we can do. So there've been some amazing advances in how we can create stem cells, but at the moment, I'm not sure we really understand how to get them into the right place in the heart, how to get them to stimulate regeneration of heart cells in the damaged tissue. So I think it's still a way off. I haven't read anything about it for a while, but last time I did, it was really quite modest benefits in experimental models. And there's ongoing research. I know, obviously, last year has really kind of nixed a lot of medical research that wasn't COVID related, but I know that one of my friends was involved with this, and it's been really hard to recruit patients because the criteria to get into the study are very, very specific. So they're looking for a very specific type of patient who's had a heart attack of a specific type in a specific place and everything. So I think it's very slow progress, but fingers crossed it will reap some benefits.
No, it's often hard to tell when you read things in New Scientist or you see a sort of headline. It's hard to know whether is this going to be in hospitals next year, or is it still some way off from being sort of regular clinical practice. But that question does lead me quite nicely onto a question from Astrid, who says, well, what recent developments in technology that have excited you the most as a cardiologist? So maybe this technology is a long way away, but is there anything that even in the last sort of 5 years has changed the way you operate or the treatments you can use?
Yeah, I'd say probably the biggest development in the last maybe 10 years or so has been the very rapid increase in the amount of structural procedures that we can do without opening up somebody's chest. So everyone's familiar with things like stents that go in via the wrist, tiny little hole, and we can put a stent in an artery. Now that technology has been around angioplasty has been around for over 40 years. But in more recent years, we've actually expanded that concept to things like valve replacements. So now we can do aortic valve replacements, the main valve leaving the heart through a small hole in the top of the leg, whereas previously we would have to open up somebody's chest and do a big open surgical operation. And initially that came in as something that would only be done to people who aren't fit enough for surgery, because it was regarded as clearly inferior. And then it became clear that actually results were very good. And then it was expanded to people who were much younger. And now we're at a stage where, I think it is going to take over the vast majority of valve replacements. We're also seeing treatments for other valves in the heart done in a similar kind of way through what's called a percutaneous, a keyhole kind of approach. So, I think that is probably the frontier in kind of clinical interventional cardiology at the moment. And it's helping patients avoid big cardiac operations. There obviously will always be a role for that kind of stuff, particularly things like congenital heart disease, people born with heart defects that can only be treated with operations. Heart transplants, of course, will always be surgical, and any kind of mechanical replacements. But I think we are going to see a reduction in things like valve surgery. So that's been quite an exciting change in cardiology.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I hope if I ever need anything, you don't have to cut everything open, because the more you open up and cut me open and expose me to the world, I think there's more chance of things going wrong.
There's an interesting tidbit here that a lot of the progress in some of these technologies, particularly in stenting procedures, comes from Japan, because culturally it's believed that if you open the chest, the soul will escape. So it's very inauspicious to open the chest. So Japanese patients will always opt for a keyhole approach if they can, rather than open chest surgery. So it's meant that actually a lot of the progress in these kind of procedures has come out of Japan. So that's just an interesting cultural tidbit there.
Oh, fascinating. We're almost out of time, but I just want to ask you one more question. I noticed a lot of people in the chat were talking about, where they were going to study, and a few people were, chatting about what courses they fancy doing or which university they fancy going. So I don't know if you just wanted to say a little bit about how you got into medicine and any advice on what the best university is and why that's the University of Cambridge.
Oh no, my undergrad St George's
okay.
from London. Medicine is actually a field where it really doesn't matter where you go actually. There was some viral tweet the other day by some journalist talking about the prestigious medical schools of London and Cambridge. But actually, so we all kind of made fun of this because medicine is a degree. It's the same degree everywhere in the UK. And I really wouldn't agonize over the destination. And in fact, I would say that if I were sending my kids to medical school, which I'm definitely not going to do, that's the one rule they have, is that they can't go to medical school. But I would probably send them off to somewhere outside of a big city, somewhere with a nice campus, that they can really enjoy the student life. And I know, having said that out loud, I know that sounds ridiculous at the moment. I feel very sorry for the current students with everything that's going on. But I absolutely loved undergraduate in London, and I'm very proud George's graduate. So joking aside, if you want to go into medicine, it's a very rewarding career, but do your research first and go in with your eyes open. But don't worry about where you study. It's not like, English or some science degrees where there are clearly one sort of top universities that will give you a very prestigious degree. You come out, you come onto the ward, and if you're a junior doctor, I'm just going to treat you like a dog's body wherever you come from. It doesn't matter.
No, I think that's right. And yeah, I think most people, wherever they end up at university, often end up just having a great time, and often maybe it wasn't the place they picked or they thought they were going to go. Certainly my wife ended up in Manchester, where she never thought she was going to go, and had a brilliant time.
Yeah, Manchester is a great place.
So wherever you end up, I'm sure you'll have a fantastic time. Please do subscribe to Rohin's channel. Rohin, do you have any other places where people can find you? Are you at MedLife on Twitter? Is that right?
At MedCrisis on Twitter and Instagram, and I've just launched my TikTok career.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah.
You're probably like one of the last doctors to have done that, surely.
Yeah, exactly. I won't be doing any dances. Well, maybe I will. Who knows? But I've made 6 TikToks. I'm a pro by now.
Oh, fantastic! Well, we'll have to subscribe and see what you get up to. Well, thanks very much, Rohin. That was absolutely fantastic, and thanks to you all.
Martin.
Oh, no problem at all. We literally contacted him through the contact form on his website because we were so keen to get him. So thank you so much for accepting. Thank you to everyone watching. We really appreciated your brilliant questions, and we'll see you all next time. Take care. Goodbye.